Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line-of-duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and as always, we have a great guest, a really intriguing guest. I have one of my podcaster friends. I always love having fellow podcasters on the show because they know what it's all about. They know how to give and take in these interviews and probably take my stupid jokes on top of it. Who I have with me today is Lauren Samples, who is the co-host of Paradise After Dark podcast, a great podcast that I actually recently covered. Some of you know I also do some work for Podcast Magazine. I write for the true crime section, and I covered Paradise After Dark, and Lauren and Ken are awesome. They do an awesome show. They're going to be featured in Podcast Magazine in the October 2022 issue. So if you are not a subscriber of Podcast Magazine, you need to get that for nothing else than to see this great article on Paradise After Dark. If you're listening to this episode in 2025, then you need to go back and order one of those back copies because it's a great article and a great podcast. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Hello. That was quite the introduction there.
Yeah, I've done this, a few times. and all BS aside, frankly, if you weren't a good podcast and I didn't have so much fun with you, didn't have so much great things to offer, you wouldn't be on here. You wouldn't get this great intro.
Well, I feel so honored. I'm blushing. I'm blushing right now.
All right. Well, let's go. We like making our guests blush for the right reasons. Sometimes we make people blush for the wrong reasons, and those usually get edited out. But before we even dig into the podcast, obviously we're Public Safety Talk Radio, and you were a police officer in the Navy, if I remember it correctly, with the intention to eventually be in the FBI. Tell us a little bit more about that. We've never had a cop from the Navy before on this show.
Okay, well, ever since I was young, I've always
like 5-10 years ago.
You're making me blush again.
There we go. Again, for the right reason.
So I've always been interested in true crime. I read Mindhunter by the famed John Douglas when I was like 14 or 15 years old. I remember falling asleep to Forensic Files when I was like 12. My main goal as I got older was to join the FBI and become a behavioral profiler. I wanted to understand like how the minds of the murderers and the serial killers worked. And I knew that I had a much better chance of being accepted into the FBI if I had a military background. And being a police officer in the Navy was the closest job that I could find to reach my ultimate goal. So I joined the Navy and I became a Master at Arms, which is pretty much the exact same thing as a regular police officer in the civilian world. We got all the same training. We went to the police academy. And I actually joined in 2002, not long after the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. And that's when the Navy really started ramping up their harbor patrol, which AKA boat cops. And I sort of fell into that job. And I did that for most of the 4 years I was in. I was a boat patrol cop, if you will.
Boat troll.
Boat patrol.
Okay, boat patrol. Okay.
Yes.
I was gonna dig into the troll part. I'm like, wow, I never heard that before. But boat patrol. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what I did when I was in the Navy, and I spent a lot of time. I spent my last 2 years over in the Middle East, which was interesting. It's sometimes a little scary, sometimes fun. It was just different.
Yeah. Yeah. So how, just given my ignorance, because I've never been in the military, how does being in law enforcement in the Navy different or compared to what the Coast Guard does? Because I know, they're doing a lot of law enforcement, especially on our oceans and so forth. Where does it differ?
Well, the Navy's a lot more badass than the Coast Guard, but besides that,
I
I
love you
always had a
military folks. I had somebody, from the Air Force that gave, some crap to the Army. I had somebody on the Army that gave crap to the Navy, so, I've got, my in-laws that, some are in the Army, some are in the Navy. And, it's like you guys just give each other crap all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, one of our best friends was a Marine, and
Mhm.
any chance I get, I try to serve him crayons for dinner. He doesn't eat them, but I don't know if you got that one.
No, that was. I'm sure some of our listeners, most of which are a lot sharper than I am, but that one just went.
Somebody out there will get it.
Okay, I'm sure. They might even, for my listeners out there, for those that do get that joke, send me a message somehow and explain it to me. But okay, so you are more badass than the Coast Guard. That may be the title of this particular podcast.
That'd be great.
A better question may be, how much water is there in the Middle East if you're a cop for the Navy?
Well, believe it or not, there's quite a bit. I was stationed on an island, Bahrain.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
this little island off the coast of Saudi Arabia, and I used to call it the Navy gas station because it was a naval support activity, and
Mm-hmm.
ships would come in and get fuel and supplies, and then they would leave. And my job was basically to guard those ships and escort them in and out. We would
Mm-hmm.
escort them probably about 10 miles out, and just make sure that something like the USS Cole never happened again.
Yeah. Yeah, and all kidding aside, I sincerely appreciate your service. Try to say
Yeah.
that to everybody that served in the military, served in law enforcement, served in firefighting, or any first responder type of role for that matter. Let's segue to the podcast. You obviously, as you mentioned in the interview I did for Podcast Magazine, your original intention was to join the FBI, but sometimes life happens. It takes you, on another path, which is perfectly fine. So the FBI's loss is the podcasting world's gain because you created Paradise After Dark. So let's segue to that. How did Paradise After Dark get started?
Well, so my husband Ken, who's also my co-host, and I
Who
were
has a great name, by the way. Anybody named Ken has to be cool, but go ahead.
well, we were both fans of true crime podcasts, and we listened to them. And it occurred to me one day, I was like, well, we could probably do this because we're both interested. I know his father was a canine cop, and
Right.
so like we both sort of have some background, and we both had an interest in it. But he was not down for it. He's like, no way, no way. That's just crazy talk. And eventually it took like a year, but I convinced him to do it just as like a hobby, just as
Mm-hmm.
something to do together. And it just sort of grew. I remember the first week looking at, we had 80 downloads, and we were like, oh my God, 80 people have listened to it. And now it's like we get 80 people like in an hour, I guess, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, it just sort of grew from there. And then we started out with like these crappy little gaming headphones, and that had, the headphones that had the little mic.
Mm-hmm.
And our sound was awful, but we just grew, and we became, I think the turning point, I guess we we went to our first crime con in New Orleans in 2019, and we met some of the bigger podcasters, and because we're so cool and charming, they like us, and they have really actually helped us and given us pointers and tips and advice over the years, and I owe them a lot too for helping us get to where we are.
Yeah. Well, you both, you and Ken, are very cool. I had the chance to see you at the last CrimeCon, which was in Vegas, which also made it in the article, which I found immensely funny. Was Ken talking about how he didn't originally want to do the podcast and that you kind of forced him into it, and you said right there, then and there, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, here we are at CrimeCon getting interviewed by Podcast Magazine. Some couples, when they want to do things together, they decide to do crafts or join a wine club or walk along the beach or something like that. They usually don't say, hey, let's do something together, let's do a podcast.
Let's do a crime podcast.
Yeah, true crime podcast. Let's not even talk about relationships. Let's talk about people that are dying and getting killed.
Yeah, it is a little weird, isn't it? I guess when you think about it that way. But I've always, I don't know, both of us have always kind of like walked to the beat of our own drum, and then we ran into each other, and here we are.
Now a word from one of the POCUA's proud business partners, OfficerPrivacy.com. OfficerPrivacy.com was founded by Pete James, a law enforcement professional with over 25 years of experience. Pete wanted to find a way to help law enforcement officers protect themselves and their families, so he formed a team to create a way to quickly identify and remove their information from certain sites. OfficerPrivacy.com is the result. This service is already offered through a select few of our POCUA organizations. As a listener of Public Safety Talk Radio, you can take advantage of a special offer from OfficerPrivacy.com. Go to OfficerPrivacy.com/POCUA, and when you sign up, you'll get 2 additional bonuses. In addition to removing your personal information from the top 30 people search sites, they will give you your first 2 months of monitoring free. This is a value of $39.98. In addition to that, you'll receive a cell phone privacy device, a $19.99 value. This prevents data from leaving your cell phone when you use public charging stations and is a must when traveling. So go to officerprivacy.com/POCUA today to take advantage of this offer and to protect your privacy. Organizations who are members of the POCUA and are interested in offering the service directly to their members, contact us at POCUA@btcinc.org.
One of the things that is kind of a bridge between what I do for Podcast Magazine and covering true crime and my love and passion for first responders, especially police and the POCUA, is that I truly believe, and your podcast certainly falls into this category, that the true crime genre, whether it be podcasts, TV, film, what have you, serve a distinct and critical purpose in society. And one of those is, keeping many of these cases alive, whether it's missing persons cases or even cases that need to come to fruition, whether it's the case itself or to teach us something about society. Tell us a little bit more about how your true crime podcast is serving the public.
Well, I think what sets us apart a little bit is that we actually try to cover the smaller cases, the ones that don't make national news. And because of that, we a lot of times work very closely with the families. And we are basically trying to keep the word out about if it's a missing person or if it's an unsolved murder. We're just trying to make sure that these cases stay in the public eye or ear, if you will, and they don't die out and become forgotten. I mean, like on the anniversary of a case or on the victim's birthday, I like to post on social media, just a little something, because everyone matters.
Yeah.
Every case matters. Every murder matters. Every missing person matters. And in a perfect world, missing people would be found and murderers would be solved, but that's not the case. So I feel like we just do our little part as best we can to just keep the word out.
Yeah. Yeah, you do, and many others do as well. And I appreciate that part of the true crime podcasting world. Is 9 out of 10 folks that I come in contact with in that particular arena believe that as you and I do. So I appreciate that.
And I want to cut, if
Please.
you will, let me, people from the outside, they think of the true crime genre, the true crime community, and events like CrimeCon. They assume that it's just everybody, talking about their favorite serial killers and this and that. And well, you've been to CrimeCon. That's not what we're about. I don't personally feel any competition with any other true crime podcast because I feel like we're all on the same side. We're all working towards the same goal, which is to get justice for families and to get closure for families and to get cases solved. And that's really what it's about. And there's groups, there's events, there's conventions, and don't think that it's just some bunch of weirdos who like to talk about murder and serial killers. It's a bunch of people who it's a really wonderful community to be a part of, actually.
Yeah, I agree. For those folks that may think that the true crime fan is some sick individual that just wants to cheer for an old serial killer. Maybe there are a few out there, but I will honestly tell you that that's a very, very low percentage, if it is, and I can come in contact with very, very few of those folks, even those folks that do a true crime show that is more of a comedic nature. I've talked to them, several of them, and they are very, very cognizant. And while they like to have fun and may make fun of the criminal, are very, very respectful of the victim and the victim's family, even in that comedic standpoint. And I will say, to your point, which I think is important and a very nice lead into my next question, is I go out of my way to not call people that listen and watch a lot of true crime and go to events like CrimeCon. I do not label them as true crime fans. I deliberately label them as true crime enthusiasts, which it may sound like a synonym, but it's very different. In that, these folks would be more than happy if there was so little crime that there'd be no need for these podcasts and conventions. But they're very big on being of help and being supportive. And the fact is some of these podcasts that are out there have solved cases, have found folks. Have given folks some closure in being able to find killers and find missing persons, although they may not be with us most of the time, if not all the time, when they are found. There is some closure in that. So there is a service to society. And to that point, and I'll stop my ramble, is while at CrimeCon 2022 in Las Vegas, I forget which session it was, but in sitting in there before the session, somebody was passing out these little cards on every single seat, and it was a picture of a missing person. And it wasn't some advertisement. It wasn't somebody selling some crap. It was family members that wanted to find their loved one. And I thought to myself, how smart is that? You've got all these folks here, and some of them call them, somewhat tongue in cheek, citizen detectives. But who better to legitimately look at this and say, all right, I'm going to look out for this guy. I'm going to look, if I hear or see anything, I'll act on it. because these aren't just fans. These are truly enthusiasts that want families to have closure and want families to have the help that they can get.
Yes. And fortunately, CrimeCon next year is going to be in Orlando. And us being a Florida-based podcast, I'm already planning on printing flyers of, I don't know, as many cases as I can that we have covered in Florida, particularly in the Orlando area. And I've actually been in talks with some of the families of some of the victims that we've covered. And I'm really encouraging them to go to CrimeCon and talk to people themselves, talk to other podcasters, say, hey, my son was murdered. Would you cover my case? And
yeah,
I've never turned anyone down. If they come to me, either whether it email or social media or face to face and said, will you cover my loved one's case? I have never said no. So, you know, family members or loved ones can definitely go to these events like CrimeCon and talk to people and learn quite a bit, you know, and then they can also maybe get some more exposure.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. But you're telling me that there's crime in Orlando right by Walt Disney World? There's actually crime? There's not supposed to be crime there.
Oh my God.
WTF, Lauren?
We did an entire episode called The Dark Side of Disney. And if you knew I want you to go back and listen to that episode. If you don't listen to anything else we've put out, Ken did all the research on that. And I was almost blown away. I was like, wow. So
yeah,
Disney's not, what do they call it? The happiest place on earth. There's actually like a prison underneath it or something like that.
Well, you know what? I mean, you know, I'm neither a huge fan nor a hater of Disney. It's just I'm kind of apathetic to it. Maybe it's because I don't have kids. Who knows? But I do know that Walt Disney World is like a city in and of itself. And anytime you have a city, even with the the best of politicians, management, and so forth. Anytime you're getting thousands upon thousands and millions even on top of each other, you're going to have crime.
Yeah. Yes.
It's going to happen.
That's true.
So, and to the point that you made earlier, about these events, I think that that's spot on in getting this exposure. And it's not just simply, people that are fanatics about this stuff, to that point. And I'll get to this question. I'll be covering the Pacific Northwest True Crime Festival for Podcast Magazine next month. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. And one of the
friends going to that.
There you go. Why aren't you going?
I literally just went to the True Crime Podcast Festival in Dallas 3 weeks ago. And then last weekend I was in Kansas City at the Generation Y 10-year anniversary show. So I need to be home for a little while.
You can't go all the way from Florida to Washington and go completely across the continent.
Not this year. Not this year.
But one of the many things that I really liked about that before I even dug into it is they're having a session in that program run by somebody from the Seattle Police Department. And I thought that was awesome in bringing those two things together, the law enforcement and the true crime. To that point, and to my question, is I found in working with police officers for almost 20 years and working in podcasting for about 5 or 6 now, that most, not all, but most law enforcement are supportive of this true crime podcast genre. Because they do have limited resources. They only have so much to work with. And maybe it's different in different states. But some are, anything that's going to get more exposure to my case, I'm all for. But you do have the other extreme, which is, I hate these people. All they do is screw up my cases. They're asking for questions. They're not law enforcement professionals. I'm the law enforcement guy or gal. Let me do my job, and everywhere in between. What do you see? Do you see it all across the board, or does the pendulum swing from one end to another, more so than another on Paradise After Dark?
Well, we've seen it across the board, but I have to say that it sort of leans toward them not being super helpful. And if it's an unsolved case, they very rarely allow us to see any case files or anything along those lines. And it's kind of frustrating, honestly. I'm currently working on a case now from 1966 that's still unsolved. And the sheriff's office, no matter what I say, will not come up off those files. They will not let me see anything, and it's driving me crazy. I don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling they don't take us seriously.
Yeah.
Until we have listeners contact us with information, and then we turn around and call the detective with the info, which has happened more than once. We have had listeners who are not comfortable going straight to law enforcement. Sure. And then they appreciate us when we bring them information. But some of them are super helpful. We've developed a really great relationship with the Collier County Sheriff's Office, which is the county we actually live in. So they'll give us pretty much anything. But when we reach out to other counties that don't know us, that don't know who we are or what we're doing, they seem a little hesitant, like, who are you? And we actually have a media company, an LLC. So it is a media request, not just a regular citizen saying, hey, can I see these files? Yeah. The media categorizations helped a little, but I don't know. It's hit or miss, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that, and, I wonder, too, because media sometimes, aren't as, how do I say this, that it's politically correct? Let's just say they don't put police always in the best light that they should, in general. So maybe the whole fact that you're a media company doesn't help.
Maybe you're right. I haven't even thought of that. Spokesperson for the sheriff's office told me to ask to put in a media request instead of like a citizen request. She told me I would get further. Maybe she was lying. I don't
know. Hey, whatever. You know what? I think for different departments and different jurisdictions, it takes a different approach. Maybe you should play up the fact that, hey, I was a cop for the Navy, and my husband comes from a law enforcement family, so I don't want to hear any crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work really well.
If only.
So, what is, as we kind of wrap up here, what do you got coming up with Paradise After Dark? What can your fans, or hopefully, new fans that, are watching or listening to this show, or all of the many that are going to read that article in Podcast Magazine, we hope, what do your fans have to look forward to from Paradise After Dark?
Well, we've recorded some pretty interesting cases that are going to be coming out. I did an interview with a forensic psychologist named Bill Kimberlin, who's been studying death row for the last 10 years. Wow. And he wrote a book, and I interviewed him and find out that he spent lots and lots of time with the likes of Scott Peterson and BK, and that was a really great discussion about the inner workings of the mind of these kind of people, which was full circle back to where I wanted to be when I was a teenager. That's what I wanted to do, but again, life. But we have that coming out, that interview, which I think is really fascinating. We've got a interesting Halloween episode, which I am actually going to be traveling to the haunted place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not far from me. It's a car ride, not a plane ride. I don't want to give it away, but we're going to be doing a haunted episode for Halloween. And I actually, believe it or not, I have my own personal project that I'm working on that will be debuting in October. And it's a serialized podcast about a murder from 1966. And
Nice.
It's going to be about 9 to 10 episodes long.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely look for that. And maybe Podcast Magazine might even be interested in that. Who in the heck knows? But yeah, exciting stuff. It's bluntly, love your podcast, love what you're doing. Obviously, if people want to find you, they could simply go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all kinds of things. How can they best find Paradise After Dark out there?
Well, we are on every single podcast platform, Apple, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all of them. We also have our website, paradiseafterdark.com, where you can listen to episodes on the website. And we're on social media at paradiseafterdark.com. On Twitter, we are paradisedark239, and Instagram, Paradise After Dark Podcast. We actually just started a TikTok, which I'm not very good with.
Damn TikTok, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not very good with it, but I'm trying. So
yeah, that's the TikTok, for Generation Xers like myself. It's a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of a challenge. But I'm hoping to tackle that sucker before the end of the year. But
yeah.
if as you work on it, if you get any tips, tell me. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Lauren, I really, really appreciate you taking some time today. Love what you're doing with Paradise After Dark, and keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for the amazing article in Podcast Magazine. I love it. I really do. I love it.
My pleasure. As I joked before we pressed record, if you had a crap podcast, not only would you not have gotten on Podcast Magazine, you wouldn't be on the show here, but you have an amazing podcast. It's something that is truly great out there, and fans that are fans of podcasts should definitely check this one out, Paradise After Dark. But thank you again for taking some time today, and thank you to all of you who have either watched or listen to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio, and we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.